or some particular shows? Yeah. Criminal Minds, stuff like that. Yeah, this slide, the beginning, shows all of the different CSIs across the country. We had CSI in New York, Las Vegas, Miami, blah, blah, blah. There could be one someday, CSI Royal Caribbean Explore the Seas, you know. I mean, everybody's jumping in on the action. Las Vegas was the most popular. They all started about the early 2000s, and like I said, Las Vegas was has been across the board the most popular. Down here we have Law and Order. Anyone watch that program? Yeah, I love that program. Special Victims, Criminal Intent, every single one of them, every spin-off is good, if not better than the one before. And now they have the new one with Mariska's kind of the big shot in the precinct. We have Criminal Minds. Love that show. It's fantastic. Dexter. Any Dexter fans? Okay. Well, Dexter was a blood spatter expert in spatter. That's SP, not splatter. Expert in Miami-Dade, Florida Police Department, fictional, of course. And by day, he would investigate crimes, and by night, he would kill the serial killers. So it's not really, obviously, we couldn't do that in real life, but I know a lot of people who in my field who would like to be able to do that. And then we have things like Dr. Henry Lee in the top right, actual true programs with true stories, and more factual and showing the correct criminal procedures. And the first 48, same thing. Anybody watch that show? Show him? Yeah, that's a really good one. Very good. And the reason it's called that, and I'm sure you've gotten that by now, is that the first 48 hours are the most important time to get clues on any crime. So it's in the first 48 hours. So this presentation is CSI Effect, Hollywood versus Reality. And I'm going to talk about what Hollywood and the media presents to you, and you know what? We really do, because they make it much cooler than it actually is. So my name is Norma Hollander-Selico. I have a master's degree in forensic science from the University of New Haven. I worked under Dr. Henry Lee. And I also am a medical legal investigator for the Disaster Mortuary Operational Response Team, which is with the government, response to mass disasters and recovering and identifying human remains and sending them back to their families. We just recently it's actually been a whole year now since Hurricane Maria. And I dedicate everything I do to my mom, who passed away last year from Alzheimer's. I love her. So, why don't we show the real thing? Why does the media, the television programs, the movies, why don't they show how we really do it? Well, mostly because it's not as much fun as how they make it look, number one. It's not as sexy. They make it look like this big, fun, sexy thing that's just like, yeah, I'm CSI. It's really, really hard work and a lot of science, and you'll see. So first of all, we got a ton of paperwork. Okay, the paperwork itself is a crime. How much paperwork? We can't move this pencil over there without, evidence, I'm using that as an example, without jotting down who touched it, when, why, all of that stuff, because later on down the road, everything, when we go to court, if we get to court on a trial, we need to be able to show that there was no misrepresentation, no exchanging of evidence, no contamination, no planting of evidence, all of that stuff. So our paperwork is coming out of our eyes. So we have different goals. Of course, Hollywood, the goal is to what we call edutain you, and make it fun. They give you a little bit of education, but with some fun on the side. They sensationalize it. They make things look cooler and bigger and faster and sexier than they are. Make it so that they're living in this world of chop chop. We want to make everything look really, really cool. But in the real CSI, we're looking for justice, closure, and we're trying to prevent crime by catching the bad guy and putting them away. And the big thing is it's completely different goal to it, and it also takes a lot of time. We don't have to do it in an hour, of course, and we can't do it in an hour. So the top 5 most annoying things for us people in this field, whether you're a police officer, whether you're in law enforcement at all, a detective, in forensics, in the lab, is that the way it's portrayed by Hollywood, because it's fun, we like to watch it, but we're pulling our hair out going, no, stop, you just touched that without gloves, or, we're looking at it and go, that is not how it's done. You don't lean over a body that's been there for 2 days and without holding your nose, it just, they take the yuck out of it, pretty much, is what they do. So, we have 5 things that annoy us the most. The first is that crime scene investigation is glamorous, that I just talked about. Heck no, not even close. I highlighted that one because it's really an annoying one. We can quickly and easily determine the exact time of death, no way. And the reason that they do that is, I'll get to that in the next slide, but basically is the time of death is very, very important to solving the crime. So if we can determine what the time of death was, then we can connect the person back to someone else or some other event, and that might help us fill in our puzzle of the crime. The fingerprints are everywhere, and they're usable. Well, fingerprints are everywhere. You guys are leaving your prints right now for me, everywhere in this place. But so is the next people who come in, so are the people who were here at Mass this morning, so are the up here, so are the dancers. So your prints, every time you touch something, you could leave it there, but that doesn't mean they're really good prints that we could actually use to make a connection. We're the jack of all trades. Oh my God, yeah, you see the CSI programs especially. We get to do everything. We get to go to the crime scene, collect the evidence. We got to test it in the lab. We get to interrogate the suspect. We get to talk to the family. That's not true. Everything is very specialized. That would be really cool because we would have more of a closure ourselves in our hearts for our cases if we could do everything, but that's not how it works. And the most annoying one is that we can solve it in an hour. It takes us an hour to get there, at least. And then we have to set up, the crime scene tape. And then we have to make sure no one comes in, no one goes out who shouldn't be there. Because they can step all over things or leave their DNA or leave their fingerprints, all that jazz. So this whole scene has to be contained. So I'll start with the least annoying of the 5 most annoying, which is crime scene investigation is glamorous. Well, not even close. We do not look like this. No one I know ever. I don't know one single girl who looks that good in the crime scene. We don't wear clothes like that. Abby down here, does anybody love Abby on the show? She's a big, the people love her. She's a great character. But in real life, it's very much like the military in a crime scene laboratory, and it's a police department, which is kind of like the military, and they don't like that kind of weirdness. When I was at the University of New Haven, I was a lab manager in forensics for 10 years, Dr. Henry Lee, and I'm just 65 years old now, but I was living in my 50s, and I had my lip pierced just on the top above, and I thought my boss was going to go absolutely mental. He just was just like, no. I'm like, but Abby, it's cool. No, cool. That is not cool to them. So it's anything but glamorous. For example, this is a Casey Kaylee Anthony case. This is where on the top left is where her skull was found in Florida in the swamp. There's her on the top right. And that's a picture on the right of evidence of the duct tape that was taken from around her jaw that had the little heart stamp on it. On the bottom right is a Cheshire home invasion. Yeah, could you turn the light off on the side? Oh, better? Thank you. Awesome. So the Cheshire home invasion on the bottom right, 2 thugs came in and actually beat up the father and ended up killing the mother and the 2 daughters and tried to burn their house down. So that is not glamorous. That's a very heart-wrenching, difficult scene, something that goes on every day after day. And on the bottom left is a Green River killer, recovering one of the bodies on the Green River case. Far from glamorous. And it smells bad. Okay, there's nothing worse than decomposition. Has anyone smelled it? No? Good for you. Nothing worse. And a lot of our students, like in the beginning of the year, we have more students than we can handle. And by January, we've lost a good half of them, or maybe 2/3 sometime, because they can't handle the science. They can't handle the smell. They can't handle the sight. It's too overwhelming. And so that is not a glamorous thing. That is a corpse plant on the right. There's a couple of them in the United States. They're giant. And they bloom once a year, and they smell like a dead body. And people come from all around to see these things because they want to see, oh, dead body can't smell that bad. And then they know that it can. So the real CSI is about closure for families and victims, right? This is the Paul Bernardo Carla Homolka case. Anyone familiar with that one? Yeah, out of Canada. He was a Scarborough rapist, and then he met for many years, and then he met Carla Homolka, and the two of them together became this serial kidnapping, killing couple. They were called the Barbie and Ken killers because they were very attractive, and they were pretty nasty people. This is just some of their victims. Okay, that was a very difficult case, went on for years and years. And on the bottom right is the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center, if you haven't thought about it that way, was actually our country's biggest crime scene. I was there in the very beginning as a EMT. I wasn't even in forensics at the time. I was in school to get my master's, but I went there as an EMT in search and rescue, and it was amazing. After 7 or 8 days, all of a sudden the government came in and shoved everybody out who wasn't on New York City Fire or Rescue, and because now they called it a crime scene. It went from a recovery area to a crime scene. As soon as they realized they weren't going to recover any people alive and be able to help them, then they had to contain any evidence that they could get. Here's some pictures from the World Trade Center. Does anyone remember the bucket brigade during the World Trade Center? Well, what that was about was collecting evidence. So in the beginning, before they shut it down and called it a crime scene for those days, they had a bucket brigade, and it was just hundreds and hundreds of firemen and EMTs and rescue people, and everyone would look through the bucket and pass it on, and if you found something that you thought was evidence, you would say evidence, and the FBI would come out and collect that, and if you found what you thought might be a body part, you'd say dogs. You'd just put your hand up, yell dogs, and the FBI would send someone out with a dogs to sniff it out and a body bag to recover it. So that's not glamorous. Well, the next least annoying is we can determine exact time of death. Like I said earlier, the time of death is very, very important because crime scene investigation is all about connecting a victim to a perpetrator. So we want to make that connection somehow, and the best way we can do that is knowing how long the person's been deceased and trying to piece things backwards from there. So on television, you see the Emmy on the court shows, oh, the person died at 9:47. That's absolutely impossible. We can't do that because we can only give a range, because how we determine it is based on a lot of very simple science, but it's a whole bunch of different things. I'll talk about that in a second. So here's Dr. Michael Baden. He had a show, Autopsy, but he's one of the most famous pathologists ever. He's still alive right now, and he worked on the John F. Kennedy case. He worked on every case you can imagine. The Drew Peterson case that I'll be talking about later on in the cruise, and any big high-profile case, he had a hand in that. And if he were on the stand in a real case and testifying, he would look at what he has and he would say the death likely occurred between 4 and 8. He can give a window of maybe 4 hours, but that's about as much as you can do. So that's the reality of it. So it's a range of time, and it's based on all kinds of clues and observations, simple stuff, like you go to the mailbox and you see mail stopped being picked up on October 5th. Okay, you go in the house and the TV guide, if they still have those, is open to October 5th. So you got 2 things there. Then you go to the neighbors. Hey, did you see anything happening over here? See anybody come and go around this time frame? Oh yeah, okay, we get that. So we piece the whole thing together. Mail, personnel items, lights on, television on, all of those things, and of course, interviewing people in the area, or interviewing family as well. So the environment plays a big factor on the breakdown and decomposition of the body. So that can enhance or slow down decomposition, so that can throw us off, right? We had this woman this man who killed his wife and then went in Connecticut and then went fishing on a fishing trip, but he made his calls back, so there would be that connection, call back and forth like he was talking to his wife. But what he did was he turned the air conditioning way up in the house, and that slowed the decomposition process down to try to throw us off, the investigative team off. It was actually pretty clever, but it didn't work. We figured that out. So whether it's an indoor or an outdoor scene, of course, you can imagine if you're indoors or outdoors, that's going to affect the whole way a body looks when you're at a crime scene. Whether you're in a wet or dry environment. In a wet environment, it starts to get what we call saponification, and then which turns into like a soap from the fatty acids. And in the desert, it just dries up. Okay, so that's a whole other ball game that tells that's we have to take into consideration when we're determining time since death. On the bottom, whether it's summer or winter, Casey Anthony, her body was found in the summer, and John Benet Ramsey, that happened in the winter. But she was indoors, so that didn't slow anything down, right? If she'd been outdoors in the snow, that would have slowed things down. But this is just examples of all of the different things that can speed up or slow down that are part of the whole investigation. So the environment, we have, of the environmental and physical variables, we also have what we call the mortis brothers. Alga mortis, lever mortis, and rigor mortis. These are all things that happen to your body after you die, and they're scientific and they're medical, and we study those things, and then we add that data into our equation to try to come up with, okay, this person probably died between 6 and 8 last night. Alga mortis has to do with body temperature, because I don't know if anyone know this, that your body loses 1.5 degrees a minute, basically, after death. Livor mortis is the pooling of blood. You see that sometimes in the crime scene shows. They'll find a body and then they'll see that the pooling of blood is on the front, and they'll say, oh, this body's been moved. Because we know that when the body pulls, it doesn't pull this way, so it did the other way, and then somebody moved it. So we can tell that, and of course the chemical reaction of the stiffening of the body. Very, very important. It comes in a few hours after death, and then lasts for a certain amount of time, and then starts to dissipate. So all of this stuff, low-tech science, is what we really have to figure out, get together, put down, and come up with a determination of a time since death. And of course, we have the presence or absence of insect activities. They are our best friends. That's probably the best postmortem identification of time that we have, insects, because they come in at a predictable time. Of course, again, we have the environment. It's easier for them to come in outside, of course, right, than it is to come in here. But they will come in and they will find a way, even to get into your house or whatever, if that's where the body is. And they lay their eggs and do they do this very predictable cycle. And we can look at the maggots on the body, and we can see how many stages there were. So we can actually predict that way. It's not high-tech science, but it's very, very good. It's very excellent because they're extremely predictable. They can also tell if a person had the drugs in their system, because when the flies land on there and they'll actually have drugs in their system from being on the body and eating the body. So they can do a lot of things. And we have beetles. We have beetles that do the same thing as well. They just clean off, and they clean it off, and it happens pretty quickly. I did some training at the Anthropological Research Facility, the Body Farm in Nashville, Tennessee, and that's what they study there. They study how long it takes based on different conditions, wet, dry, et cetera, and then after they got that started, they started thinking, you know what, we need to do the same thing on the East Coast. We need to do it where it's really cold and where the weather changes and all of that stuff as well, right, so that they get the environmental factors in there as well. But one thing at a time. It started off in Knoxville. Now there are several body farms, research facilities across the country. So number 3, fingerprints are everywhere and they're perfect. Oh God, they are everywhere, but they're not perfect. And lots of times they're one on top of another, and they're messed or they're sloppy or you can't lift them very well. So fingerprints are actually excellent because they're an identifier, just like DNA. You are the only person in the world with your fingerprints, you and you alone. No one else, not your identical twin, no one in the world has your same fingerprints. But to get a great print and to have it be so perfect is another story. So here's some pictures. You see, like that wine glass probably has a bunch of prints on it, right? They probably do belong to just one person, but they're all smeared on one thing on top of the other. And on the bottle of liquor, we still have to lift that correctly. And finding them that can be developed are pretty hard. It's very hard, and they have to be able to go into, eventually, if it's a big crime, right, into the automated fingerprint identification system. So we find fingerprints and we put it in there, and that instrument, which is countrywide, it just pulls out everything that comes close to that print, and it might do 300 or 400, might spit out possibles, and then somebody has to sit there and identify them. Somebody has to sit there and examine them with a loop, one at a time. So of course inside, I mean, where do you look for fingerprints in here, right? Where do you find them? It's a mess. And often, not most houses look like this in crime scenes. Even in crime scenes, they don't look like this necessarily at all. But there's usually a struggle, and there's usually a mess of some kind. And then and if it's in someone's house, you have to identify all of the prints and just take those out of people that live there, maybe that have another alibi, weren't there. So there's all kinds of things that get in the way of identifying the fingerprints that are actually related to the crime. And of course, if you have crime scenes outdoors, then you got rain, snow, bugs, people coming and going, all kinds of stuff. What is, where do you begin to look? So you can see how none of this could ever happen in an hour. It's not happening. But they only have an hour, so that's what they do. The jack of all trades, oh man, I wish we could do that. I wish we could do everything. I wish we could go to the crime scene. This is one of the CSI programs, and he's at the crime scene here collecting evidence. He doesn't have a net on. That's not good, because if hairs fall down there, he doesn't know, no one knows if they're supposed to belong there. They're his or they're part of the crime. He does have gloves on, thank you very much, which is amazing. Over here, he gets to interrogate people. No, we don't get to do that. That'd be really cool. And then he goes back into the lab and he tests it, the same person. No, that's not true. Many years ago, I trained in the medical examiner's office in Rhode Island because I had applied for a job as a coroner on the West Coast, and I spent a couple months there. And that was the part that I found the most difficult to handle. Even after I had my master's degree, all of that was that I only did one thing. They let me try different things, but not at the same time. I never got to follow a case from beginning to end. So I never had any closure about this person that we found yesterday from a drug overdose. I might do the part of going to pick them up. I might do the part of helping them do the autopsy. I might do the part of doing the testing, but you don't do it all. And so there's a big gap there of closure in our own minds, because as much as television makes it look like a really fun thing, it's something that's like in your soul for you to do, but it also takes toll on you. And when you don't see from the beginning to the end, there's no closure in your own mind for what you're doing. So that's very difficult. So we have technicians who come in and collect evidence at the crime scene. Over here this is the Annie Lee case. Anyone familiar with that one? Show of hands? No? In New Haven, she was at a university and she was doing research, and she ended up being strangled and murdered by one of her coworkers who hid her body in the wall. And what helped us in that case was that there were cameras outside of all of the buildings at Yale, and because there were cameras, we got a picture of her going into this building, the one she worked in, but never coming out. So we should have had a picture of her coming out. So we knew when she went missing that she was still in there. And efforts were concentrated right there in that building because we knew she didn't come out of there. And they ended up finding her body right behind a wall in there, very close to where she worked. And her coworker didn't like the way he felt she was treating the mice for those projects and things like that. And he had killed her and strangled her and put her in the wall. And believe it or not, when this happened, the FBI got called in, and the whole staging to examine the building and take evidence was right not far, maybe from here to the middle of this room, from where her body was actually found, behind the wall. So they were that close. They were that close right from the beginning. So on the bottom left is Gary Ridgway, and here this is when he is being interrogated by a police officer, which is exactly how it is actually done. He's the Green River Killer, which is actually the biggest, the most murders ever in the United States, the Green River Killer. Talk about him in a bunch of other presentations. And the bottom right is what evidence collecting people do at the lab. They tag, they identify, everything's taped up, and there's a chain of custody, paperwork. And we don't get to do what Dexter did, he sits down, he takes his evidence, and then he goes, okay. He investigates the case on his own, and then he goes and finds the serial killer, and he kills them the same way that they killed their victim. I mean, yes, I think every person who responds, forensic people who respond to these cases for years and years and years have dreams occasionally that they could do that, but it's not, obviously, that is so far from what we can actually do, ever. So solved in an hour, that is the most annoying. And the reason it's the most annoying is because it makes real investigation case, real investigators, police, lab, makes us look dumb. Because why does it take you 6 months or a year or 5 years? Well, what is going on here? It's such a disparity of time. But of course, they only have that time to put it in and make it fun. And we have to make sure it's perfect. We have to make sure there's no holes. Because if there's a hole somewhere, that is going to end up losing the case somewhere down the road in court, or misidentifying information and getting the wrong person. Imagine there's been plenty of that from the past, which with DNA now we are exonerating, that kind of stuff. So it's very, very important that we take our time and look at it correctly. So it starts with a 911 call, and then we arrive, we set up a perimeter, we make sure we wear personal protective equipment, because to protect ourselves, but more to protect the evidence. It's way more to protect the evidence, so that we don't introduce our stuff into the crime scene. Then we collect it and test it and test it. This is kind of where things fell apart in the O.J. Simpson case. That was one part. When they got there, lots of people, there were lots of detectives there. There were also, excuse me, new people in the lab portion of it, and people walked all over everything. They walked all over it. So that doesn't change anything. If I walk through this crime scene and there's bloody footprints and they belong to someone else, it's not going to change it. It just adds to the whole puzzle that you have to figure out what belongs there and what doesn't. And it also makes everything look like these people don't know what they're doing. They're all over the place. They're not careful. So basically that was the downfall in the O.J. case. Amongst other things, losing a vial of blood that was taken from O.J. The detective put it in his pocket and did not turn it in for like 4 days. He went from his pocket to his jacket to his trunk of his car for 4 days, then he turned it in. So of course, then people say, well, how do you know that wasn't tampered with? How do we know this is this or this is that? So those are the questions that come in when you don't do the methodical crime scene investigation. So we have DNA, that's our gold standard. We love it. Why? Because it's an individualizer like fingerprints. No two people in the world have the same DNA except, does anybody know? Identical twins. They have the same DNA, but they have different fingerprints. We'll talk about that in signatures at the scene, another presentation that I'll be doing, comparing fingerprints and DNA and how that works and why they're so important, and the things that are great about them and the things that are challenging about them as well. So it takes, in the real world, about 48 hours to do a DNA test. First, we have to get the cells, right, from the person. We have to compare them. You can get them inside any, or in many things. You can get it in the bulb and at the end of a pulled out hair. You can get it from cheek cells inside your mouth. You can get it from blood that's been drawn from the body. You can get it from all kinds of places, that cigarette butt, things like that. We have to extract it. So I'll show you. So in a nutshell, there's 4 parts to it. You have to extract it. You have to suck out the DNA. Then you have to quantify it. And in quantifying, we make tons and tons of copies of it, many, many, many copies, so that we have a lot to look at. But it's exactly the same. There's no way to change it. There's no problem with doing that. Then we amplify it. And then so that's when we make a bunch of more copies of it. And then we put it on what we call a gel, and it separates all the proteins, and it gives us this pattern. And no 2 people in the world have the same pattern. Parts of our pattern are the same. Parts of our pattern are the same for everybody, but there's certain loci, there's certain parts in the DNA pattern that are different for everyone. So here it is. Doesn't look that cool. Doesn't look like the spiral, but so you get the idea. That's where the DNA, we extract it, then we amplify it, then we run it on a gel, and the bottom right is what the information that we glean from the gel. This one here has a very interesting story to it. The top part right here, this is OJ's pattern. See? Let's see, this one right here is the pattern that was found on the sock inside his bedroom before he left and left for that business trip. He had changed his socks, and there was a sock in his bedroom that had, in the ankle part, had this drop of blood right here. And then when Duran Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson's blood was tested, we got these patterns. So this one on the sock, if you can see right there, and Nicole's are identical. So what does that mean? That means Nicole's blood is on that sock. Does that mean he killed her? I don't know. Maybe so many people mess up the crime scene. Maybe somebody put some blood from Nicole's body on his socks to set him up. I mean, you see how this could get out of hand? And it does in the court. That's why we can't make any mistakes, because any mistakes gets amplified, twisted around. It's politics pretty much. So now about that solve in an hour thing, the real magnitude of the problem is too big. Okay, we have so much crime in around the world that you just could never go from one thing to the next like that. It takes time. It takes so much time and effort, and attention can be taken from one case to another depending on its priority and things like that. So it's a very difficult task. It's a very amazing career, but it's really difficult. So here's some statistics from 2015, because they don't do it every year, but there's violent crime every 26 seconds in the United States, okay? A murder every 33.5 minutes, a rape every 4.2 minutes. So you can imagine the magnitude of this, and the police departments and their science and their their labs, being able to take all of this information, keep it straight, do everything perfectly right, so that when this case is solved, it can go to court and it can be proven scientifically in court. There's a lot going on all the time, basically. And across the world, the darker red are the places with the highest crimes, violent crimes, and as you can see, sadly, but predictably, the poorest places in the world have the highest number of violent crimes per capita, and a lot of that actually has to do with areas that have a lot of gang activity and a lot of corrupt political activity going on, gangs, drug dealers, people who are just down and out and drug takers, and so that has a big influence on how much they can get done and how fast they can get it done. The following, these are the countries that are the highest homicide. Of course, the highest of all these 10 is Honduras. Again, crimes, gangs, it's gangs, drugs, little value for life, little appreciation of the value of life, corrupt police departments, people who can get paid off, all of that stuff. So this all plays into what we have to do every day. Honduras, by far, of course, drug cartels, so you can imagine, they're always killing one another. When I was in Puerto Rico for a month, Hurricane Maria, and I worked at the medical examiner's office, and we had numerous deaths come in that were gang members because they started fighting one another, because there was so much of a police presence around the island with the National Guard and this and that, everyone coming in to help, that the drugs weren't coming in and out of the island as normal, so the gangs started trying to steal from one another. So on top of the victims of the storm that we had, we were getting in people from the gangs that were killing one another. The realistic crime solving, it has the timelines are much longer, and there are failures. There's some where we just can't get enough evidence to prove it. In the United States anyway, you're innocent until proven guilty, so that's where the burden lies. Other countries, the penalties are higher for crimes, and the system isn't quite like ours, so they actually have a better resolution rate than we do. And we have a lot of successes, which is awesome. So here's Dennis Rader, just to give an example of how much time. Dennis Rader, BTK, anyone remember that crime scene? Well, BTK, he had 10 victims, took 17 years. Okay, 17 years. Richard Crafts, he was an airline pilot in Connecticut, and he murdered his wife, who was a stewardess, and chopped her body up with a wood chipper. I'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. One victim, but it took 1 year. Gary Ridgway, Green River Killer, 16 years. He was convicted of 19, but he confessed to 71, but we think is probably over 100. His victims were prostitutes. He would pick them up, and then he would show them pictures of his son, his little boy, and say, "See, I'm not, I'm a good guy. I have a kid. Blah, blah. I just, my wife doesn't understand me, whatever." And he would take them away and kill them. But the reason why he got away so long is not because the police don't care about that population of victims, prostitutes, but their lifestyle is such that other people don't report them missing very quickly. They could be gone for days, they could be gone for a week before somebody goes, "Hey, what happened to Lisa? Did you see her on the street?" Whatever. It's not like if it were our child, right? You'd be on the phone that night saying, "Hey, my kid didn't come home, or my daughter isn't here." So things don't get investigated in a timely manner. Jeffrey Dahmer, Milwaukee cannibal, 17 victims, 13 years. Hardly an hour. Ted Bundy, 4 years, 35 plus victims. I have an entire presentation on him towards the end of the cruise. And then, anybody from Australia here? Yeah, we're on our way. Do you know this case? The bodies in the barrel of the Snowtown murders? Yeah, big case. South Australia, 12 victims, 7 years. So, same in other countries, it takes a long time. And then we have the unsolved crimes, ones that still are not solved. Adam Walsh, 6 years old, in Florida. That was a very sad case. And of course, his dad started the America's Most Wanted program, and hundreds of thousands of people have been caught and convicted through that. So he created this network. He put it out there like, hey, have you seen this person? This and and pictures and everything. And it started off small, and now it's like he's an amazing help to law enforcement. Malama Khan, bottom right, bottom left, she went missing with her parents in Portugal when they were at dinner, and they left her and her brother in a hotel room right within eyesight, supposedly, of where they were having dinner, but someone kidnapped her and she's never been found. And this little girl here, Amber Hagerman, she was 9 years old, and that was in Texas, and she still unsolved, but she was responsible for what we have, the Amber Alert. When you see that, there's an Amber Alert, 10-year-old missing over here. If you have any information, please call the police. Very important. And these children here, the Beaumont children, all three of them went to the beach together on a bus in Adelaide, Australia, and went missing. I do believe that there's a development in this case just in the last month or so. I'll look into more of that, but I think they may have found some more evidence in this case. So they're the Beaumont children again. Yeah, and they're on a bus ride for a 5-minute ride. Now you can imagine like letting your children go on a bus by themselves now. You would be arrested, right? But back in the day, and I'm not from Australia, I don't know, that may be a very safe place to be. Maybe nobody would have thought twice about saying, yeah, go down to the beach, whatever, go ahead. I don't know that part of it. And then we have the missing and found, and those are the ones we live for. Those few cases where someone goes missing and we actually find them and are alive and well and they thrive. J.C. Duggard, she was missing from 91 to 2009, 18 years. Can you imagine that? She lived in a little shed in the back of this guy's yard. And on the bottom, Elizabeth Smart, she was missing for 9 months. Couple took her and they made her their slave, and the woman actually just got out just a few days ago. She was actually released from jail. So they felt that she had been coerced and forced apparently to do this by Mitchell, the guy the male counterpart of that team that went in and stole her out of her bedroom. So her sentence was very short. It's kind of frightening to think of that, though. And in Cleveland, Ohio, in 2013, they had all of these girls were being kept hostage by this man. Can you imagine that? I don't know. I'm sure you guys remember that case. It was a very big case. And one day he just forgot to lock the door. And one of them went out there and just started yelling to the neighbor, and the neighbor's like, what? And he comes over, and that's how they were discovered. The one on the left, Amanda Berry, right here, she actually ended up having a baby by the perpetrator here. Can you imagine that? And the baby was born on Christmas Day. So he was sexually molesting all of these girls for all of these years and was never caught. This is how close his house was to other people's houses. Can you imagine that? And they were in the basement most of the time. So if we tie it all together, crime scene and homicide, death investigation is not a glamorous job. It's a job that you do because somehow it's in your DNA to do that, to figure out these puzzles and to bring justice to families as best you can. You can't fix what happened, but you can. It's very helpful when we know who did what and that person is taken off the street. That's very important. Determining the time of death is never exact, and it's based on a lot of very basic information. Time, temperature, body pooling, stiffness of the body. We look at the body weight and where was the body found. We take all of those things into consideration. Well, that would have slowed down. If the body was found in the snow, that would have slowed down or retarded the decomposition rate. And we take that all into consideration so that we can say, okay, this probably happened between these two times. That's what it looks like scientifically to us. So then the detectives can work on that, finding out where that person was, what were they doing, who they might have been with during that time. And a good fingerprint is hard to find. It's very hard to find, but when you get one, it's gold. Although we call DNA our gold standard, if you see my signatures at the scene presentation, you'll see that fingerprints have one thing over on DNA, and that no one in the world has the same fingerprints, where DNA, at least identical twins do. And we don't get to play every part, no way. And it takes a long time. It takes a long time. There's a lot of I's to dot, that word. I's to dot and T's to cross, and don't miss one of them, because some savvy lawyer's gonna call you to task on it and say, hey, you didn't do your job, what'd you do? How can you trust them, right? All the information has to be right. You don't want the wrong person to be convicted of a crime. So the pros are that there's a lot, we have some pretty educated juries. Anybody been on jury duty in the last 5 years or so? I get thrown off every time. I try, I get it, I go, they're like, no, we don't want you. CSI is on the map, so that's given us a lot of funding, and so a lot of education, and tons of students at the university. Like I said, in the fall, we have more students than we can handle, but by January, they've weeded through a lot of those students, because they realize this is not what I thought it was. So the interest in education, research, that's a really good part of having it on the map. The cons. This desensitization to violence. You see on television, it looks like, oh, yeah, it doesn't look as ugly as it really is. And that's not a good thing, that gets into our heads that way. Jury education can be great in some ways, but in other ways, they can expect too much, or they can think they know more than they do, or they can have seen something on a program that isn't quite exactly the right way, and they're going to go with that because they saw that on Criminal Minds 25 times, or Law and Order. Yeah, I saw that in CSI Miami. So, here's an example, a cartoon. There were 10 eyewitnesses. He has a motive. He pled guilty. And the jury's still saying, where's the DNA? Well, we don't need DNA, okay? So DNA isn't the everything. It isn't the be-all, end-all. Is it the only thing? It just happens to be a great identifier, like fingerprints. But you can have, if you have 10 witnesses, he has a motive, the person has a motive, they plead guilty, probably you look at that and that, if you got enough evidence there, that probably is enough, correct? And you don't need to go beyond. So it's much less about looking hot, driving smart and driving Hummers, like they all drive Hummers, really. I actually went upstairs to the arcade. Anybody been on the arcade? I'll put the picture up when I can figure out how to download it in there. And you can drive a Hummer in one of those little toy things. And I'm like, that's about as close as I'll ever get to a Hummer. We don't make that money. There's no money like that. It's not about that. We don't do that. Oops. We don't do this with our sunglasses. Oh, what's going on here? And we can't be as cool as Abby. Oh, and Reed on the bottom right, he's just adorable. But no, we don't have guys like that who work there. No, not that I've ever seen. So it's more about wearing Tyvek's jumpsuits and looking for nasty evidence in nasty environments, because people do really horrific crimes. A lot of times they dump those people in nasty environments. They dump their victims there. And our job is to go through that and find out. On the bottom right is the crash in Florida, a plane crash. Searching through the swamp, can you imagine? For bodies, for evidence. That is not a glamorous job, and it was a very dangerous job because there were also alligators there. The World Trade Center on the left, again, the biggest crime scene we have technically in our country. So, a real crime scene technician would say that this work is hot and smelly, and our labs are more like our high school labs. They don't have that fancy stuff. Some FBI labs have some of that fancy stuff, but the everyday police department laboratories, it's not like that. It's not like that at all. And there are no good calls, because if you get called out to pick up a body, it's going to be a bad thing one way or another. But then my bad pun. But when it's in your blood, like me, it's just something you've always wanted to do. I always wanted to be a detective when I was a little girl, and I found some True Detective magazines in my aunt's outhouse at her summer camp, and I was 9 years old, and I was reading those things like, wow, really into the puzzle of the crime without freaking out at the pictures, because they were pretty graphic back then, True Detective magazine. And that's what got me interested. And then I actually had a very serious crime. My cousin was raped and murdered when I was 21. She was 12. So I happened to be part of a family that watched this investigation unfold. That took 6 years to solve that case. So Monk, I love Monk. Why is he so good? He's good because he's OCD. That might make you nuts in real life. That might be really, really, really hard to deal with. You know, make your life difficult and unmanageable. But in our world, he's the guy we love. He's the detective we love, who sees every little thing and just picks that's important over there. That's not what that is. It sees like this big picture. He's the guy. So that's my email address, normaannselico@gmail.com. And I'm starting a website and for discussions, like a blog, if people are interested in talking about a case or a case in their own family or any case that's out there, or just some comments and things like that. Please feel free to tell me. It says end of September, but I actually just got back from Greenland, speaking on the Royal Caribbean ship, and then turned right around and came here. That was unexpected, so I would have had my website up. So now it'll be the beginning of November, because we're here for almost like the whole month, pretty much. So thank you so much for your time. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to see you outside there, because there's another event that's coming in here now. So if you have any comments, please let me know. The next presentation will be tomorrow. I believe it's at 11 in Star Lounge, I believe. And it'll be The Fascinating World of Forensics. Thank you so much.